Test. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Troy Show. You are indeed going to... Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Troy Show. This is the Troy Show, and I'm going to give you a treat today. I'm not going to talk to you. What you're going to hear is sort of an audio book, sort of. I have been off and on over the last couple years writing a fiction novel. And so what you're going to hear right now is Chapter 1 of my book, saVed. So sit back, and I hope you enjoy it. There were no sounds, no animals lurking in the darkness, no insects chirping. Had it not been for the loud electric buzzing of the power lines above them, there would be no sounds at all. Billy followed closely behind Matthew. Not because he wanted to. He had made it clear to Matthew many times he didn't want to. He followed because he understood better than anyone the pain and suffering and loss of human life that would spread around the world if he didn't. Though his mind was constantly bombarded by thoughts of what he was supposed to be doing and the consequences of failing, his mind wandered back to the eerie quiet. He felt as if he was the only living soul in the entire world, looking across a dark ravine of nothingness, the lone observer of a world at its birth. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. No animals, not a single cricket or mosquito, just the sounds of the crackling branches beneath his feet and the perpetual sound of power lines buzzing above his head. Suddenly, Matthew stopped, bringing Billy's mind back to reality. "Stay close to me," he whispered. Matthew took a step forward, raising a hand behind him to make sure Billy didn't make a move. They stood at the corner of a huge 10-foot-tall gray rocky fence, hidden in the darkness by unkempt brush all along the edge of the wall. Matthew chanced to peek around the edge. "What is it?" Billy whispered anxiously. "What can you see?" Matthew didn't answer. This was one of the qualities among many qualities he didn't like about Matthew. In the time he had known Matthew, he had learned not to ask questions because he knew they would only linger in the air unanswered. "We need to get to the other side," Matthew whispered calmly, still looking around the edge of the wall. "And we need to get there quickly." He turned to Billy and examined him carefully, methodically. "Can you run?" Billy was pretty offended by the question. He knew his skills in athletics were incredibly lacking these days, that he was by no means any kind of example of fine health, but Matthew didn't have to make it so obvious just how clear that fact was. Early on in his high school and college years, Billy was slightly more agile, but a lot had changed in his life. A lot. And he was definitely no longer that person, not at all. He regretted these losses and was hurt that this stranger would bring them back to the front of his mind. "What do you mean by that?" Billy asked gruffly to the back of Matthew's head. "Of course I can run." He was not going to let this guy push him around. Matthew took a step away from the corner toward Billy and looked intensely into his face. The tired shadows around Matthew's eyes were enough to remind Billy the importance of what they were doing. "There's not a whole lot of foot space between the wall and the incline," Matthew said, annoyed and tired. "If you fall, it's all over. This was all for nothing." "It's about 2 feet from the wall to the ground. If I fall, I think I'll be okay," Billy said, forcing a smile to let Matthew know he was kidding. Matthew apparently did not like jokes. Matthew's countenance became so intense, Billy's smile immediately faded, and he nearly stumbled backward. "If you fall," Matthew whispered roughly, "we both die." Do you understand?" "Yes, I understand," Billy replied, looking down, not wanting to see the expression on Matthew's face. He didn't want Matthew to see how ashamed he was at his sad attempt of standing up for himself. When Billy looked up a moment later, he was stunned to see that Matthew had already fled along the path. Looking around the corner, he could see him a good 50 feet ahead. With his heart nearly beating out of his chest already, he managed one more brief look around the corner to make sure no one was watching, upwards for one last plea for protection, and quickly lunged through the brush on the other side of the corner, doing his best to keep up. Billy realized very quickly just how out of shape he really was. The first few yards had flown by, and he was already out of breath. On this night, though, his lack of athleticism and poor health was not something he would allow to consume his thinking. So he pressed on, forcing himself to follow Matthew beside the jagged wall. When he caught up, Matthew was crouched behind a bush looking in Billy's direction. "You okay?" Matthew asked. "Yeah," was all Billy could get out. He tried to catch his breath, but was having a hard time doing it. He wanted to rest for at least a few moments, but rest was going to have to wait. Matthew broke through the brush and carefully ran down the incline into a heavier coverage of pine trees. Billy followed. It was darker here. Not for the lack of moonlight breaking through the thick blanket of trees above. This was a weightier darkness. Billy felt it heavy on his heart. He felt the pressure of this night more in this moment than he had since this burden was first given to him. He felt it in his gut, an emptiness, a numbness, and he was suddenly overcome by a feeling that he would rather lay down where he was beneath this tree, fall asleep, and never wake up again. This was not an unfamiliar feeling to him. This was something he had experienced many times in his life, a feeling that was strangely comforting, a feeling that reminded him just how pathetic and worthless he was. But on this night, for the first time in his life, he decided to push the feeling way down out of his mind and resolve that on this one thing he would not relent. Matthew and Billy sat crouching behind one of the larger trees, both staring intently towards the other side of the woods, where a lone, rustic, broken-down building stood, encircled by dozens of dead or dying trees. The ground was brown and grassless, covered in what might have been years of fallen pine straw and brown, brittle leaves. It was obvious no one had been on this ground for many years. They sat silently, looking at the building, Billy wondering what their next move would be. They were both mesmerized by the one lighted window staring back at them. Neither of them said a word. Neither of them felt it was appropriate to say a word. They both knew what the other was thinking. Matthew looked frightened, and Billy was surprised by this. They had gotten this far under Matthew's guiding, and Matthew now seemed like he was going to give in. They were literally within running distance of the building, and yet all Matthew could do was stare hypnotically into the light of the window. Billy was getting restless. "You ready?" he asked anxiously. There was no response from Matthew. "Let's go!" Billy nearly screamed. Still, Matthew was silent. 6 weeks earlier, there was complete darkness. It was a darkness he could literally feel, but it didn't scare him. In fact, the emptiness was strangely comforting. "Open your eyes." The words of this command seemed to float all around him, not from any particular direction, but all directions, from everywhere. Open your eyes. He didn't want to. Opening his eyes would bring in the light, and he was already getting quite comfortable with the nothingness. He liked it. "Billy!" This time he recognized the voice echoing all around him as his own voice. He was trying to wake himself up. The darkness was bringing him a joy he had not known for quite a while, and he knew the moment he opened his eyes it would be all over. Life would continue. And though his greatest desire in this moment was to stay asleep and never wake up, he forced his eyelids to open. What his eyes perceived was completely unrecognizable to him. He was not, as he initially thought, lying in his bed at home. Instead, he was standing in the middle of a large, brown, empty field, seemingly running on forever before him. To his right and left was a wall of very tall trees that appeared to be the edge of an endless forest running along each side of him. In front was an empty valley, a wide, grassy path that continued on for several miles. The sky was gray and cloudy and growing darker. Through the quiet around him, he could hear the buzzing of power lines. He looked around, trying to remember how he got here, looking for some kind of clue that he was not dreaming. There was nothing in his possession or his closest whereabouts which indicated where he was or how he got to this place. He couldn't remember anything. "Think, Billy, think!" he nearly screamed out. He was becoming overwhelmed with anxiety and loneliness. How did he get here? Why can't he remember how he got here? Where was he before this? The anxiety was building inside him from the deepest places inside his guts. He felt as if he was going to jump out of his skin. Crack! He turned suddenly behind him and saw no one. Something was out there, he knew it. Whatever it was, he could hear it moving around behind the bushes deep inside the forest edge. Crack! It was moving closer to him through the trees. Billy turned and began running quickly in the opposite direction of the sounds. He started frantically looking to his left and right, anywhere that might provide some kind of safety, a secure hiding place, any place he could run for safety. But there was nothing. The valley before him seemed to grow longer and more narrow as he ran, and the forest seemed to grow taller, the trees arching suddenly and loudly toward him above his head. The darkness of the sky was growing, and he felt the talons of panic gripping tightly and mercilessly around his heart. A crack of thunder swept him to the ground. He was face down in the dirt, eyes blinking madly, sweat dripping from his forehead, quenching the thirst of the dying ground below him. He could not see or feel anything. He was completely numb except for the panic and fear building inside his chest. He pushed himself up from the ground, resting on his knees. He looked up and all around him but saw nothing, just blackness. He could feel the presence of evil. Either this presence was invisible or his terror had arrested his sight. Whatever the case, Billy knew he was going to have to get up from the ground and flee from his life, darkness or not. And in that moment, literally in the blink of an eye, before he could get up and make his first step, the darkness was gone. The presence had fled, and Billy could see the sky again. It was still cloudy and gray, and in the distance he could hear the booming echoes of thunder and the promise of a storm brewing, but he was glad to be able to see again. After a few moments of rest and enjoying the delightful feelings of not being savagely murdered or eaten or ripped apart limb from limb, or having his soul ripped from his chest, whatever that thing was capable of doing, he looked behind him and saw someone approaching him from inside the woods. His heart stopped. Not good, he thought, while struggling to his feet and began running for his life despite the burning in his lungs. He was trying to catch his breath but was not able. He was trying to keep moving forward, to just keep moving, but his legs were becoming heavy. His feet were moving, but the ground was not allowing him to move along it. It felt as if someone or something was willing him to stop, forcing paralysis on his body. He was running too quickly to notice the uprooted tree in front of him. When he did see it, it was too late. He felt himself flipping, flying through the air. Ground, sky, ground, tree. Ugh! He lay there with his eyes closed and felt the person coming closer, approaching him very casually. Billy finally gave in, surrendering himself to whatever might happen next, waiting for the hand of death to steal his heart. The person stopped. All time stopped. Billy lay on the ground, eyes clenched shut, wondering what it was going to feel like having his brain slide out of the top of his head. "Why are you so scared?" the stranger asked. Billy didn't answer. He just kept breathing. He opened his eyes to see a man completely dressed in black. Black shoes, pants, black sweatshirt and cap. "I'm not going to hurt you," the man said calmly. "You are safe with me. Everything is all right now." Billy examined the man more closely. A thin, brown-haired, scruffy, tired-looking man stood at his feet. A man who appeared to have just fought with the very embodiment of death and lost, but somehow still managed to stand on his own 2 feet. "Who are you?" Billy asked, voice shaking. "Where am I? What do you want?" "My name is Matthew," he said. "I need you to come with me. I would love to say you had a choice in the matter, but unfortunately, at this point, you have already run out of time." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Is that right?" "Man, I was hoping it wouldn't come to this." "Very well." In a single moment, his tone changed from serious business drill sergeant to a grouchy father yelling at his delinquent son. "Billy, get up, you lazy, weak, pitiful little boy," he screamed out. "Stand on your feet. Stop being an ass." Billy was shocked at this change. That someone he didn't know would speak to him like this was a little maddening. But he was immediately slipping into the memories of his childhood. His own father had hissed out words like this to him all the time when he was a kid. He loved his father, craved his attention, but rarely got it. What he did get from him was the feeling that he, Billy, was an irritant, a barrier obstructing his father of having any joy in life. Billy was sitting at the campground pool his father had taken him one summer for vacation. His father on the other side of the chain-linked fence videotaping some fine young thing on the other side of the pool. Billy remembered all he wanted was to have his dad say what a good diver he was, to have him at least look at him for a moment, to have some kind of connection. "Dad," Billy called out, standing at the edge of the pool. "Hey, Dad, watch me dive! Hurry up, damn it!" Billy knew the video camera was still focused on the other side of Billy. So he stood, waiting for his father to shift to him. "Billy, dive, you ass! Hurry!" He had never forgotten that moment. For Billy, it was a defining moment in his relationship with his father. Billy understood this was not a fixable relationship. He did not dive. He walked away to some place now lost in his memory, and now, in the present, he lay on the ground, someone else above him, putting him back in his place. He didn't like being spoken to like that back then, and certainly did not appreciate it as an adult. He didn't like having these childhood memories brought back. He didn't like being treated like a child. "Shut up, you bastard!" he shrieked, rage bursting out from the depths of his chest. He was surprised by the wrath that had spewed out of him. He looked up at this stranger and hated that the man was smiling back at him. "Billy," Matthew said gently, "get up." He stretched out his hand, and Billy reluctantly allowed this stranger to help him up. The outburst made him feel stupid. Then again, he always did have a problem controlling his emotions, especially when he was angry. "You okay?" Matthew asked, brushing leaves and grass off Billy's shoulder. "You all right?" "Yeah? Good. I need you to listen to me very carefully. What I'm about to say to you will not make sense, but it is very important that you hear me out. Since I have no idea where I am or how I even got here or how I'm supposed to get home, I believe it's safe to say I have a little bit of time on my hands. Please," Billy urged Matthew sarcastically, "go ahead." "We need to leave right now, Billy." "How do you know my name?" Billy asked, unimpressed. "If you don't come with me, all the people you know, all the people along your street, your neighborhood, your city, everyone you know and love will be erased from existence. You will have nothing to go back to." "Oh dear," Billy cried out, overly theatrical. "This sounds quite serious." "Well, it's obvious you don't believe me," Matthew said. "But I assure you, if you come with me, a lot of things will begin to make sense to you. including your father's death. That is exactly what it took to get Billy's attention. A quick sucker punch to the solar plexus. Matthew smiled. What you just experienced back there, Matthew continued, with the darkness and terror, that was the birth pangs of something that will soon be born. Billy just stared at him. He could not believe what he had just heard. He was definitely terrified during the darkness and terror, but how in the world could this complete stranger know anything about his father? Billy had purposely not told anyone after he moved from his childhood home all those years ago, so it was a little strange someone knew about it. Billy didn't know what to say. Even if he did, he wasn't sure his mouth would be able to form the words. Having his father's death make sense to him sent a cold shock through his core. Of course he would love for this tragedy to make some kind of sense, but how could it? His death never made sense to him and could never make sense to him. Billy did not enjoy reliving everything from his past that he had tried to forget, but the thought of everything being erased, of his whole world being taken away, every bad feeling, every night of endless depression and loneliness brought a twisted sense of intrigue and hope. The world brought him too much pain as it was, and if there was a possibility for it to all just go away, this was exactly what he had been wanting. Initially, Matthew seemed like a loon to Billy, but the moment he mentioned Billy's father, a coldness washed over his body. Maybe it was the insanity of everything that had happened since he arrived here, or he was in the beginning stages of losing his mind. Either way, Billy's gut told him to start believing what this man was telling him. "Everything will be erased?" Billy asked eagerly. "Everything will be erased," Matthew agreed. "What will happen to me?" You will be erased." Billy looked down at his feet, a million thoughts flooding his thinking. I will be erased? Maybe I will finally be able to sleep. Maybe my emotions will settle down. Maybe. The words continued to echo in his head, louder and louder until nothing else could be heard. His brain was screaming out that something could finally, possibly release him from his tortured life. The last few years of his life had been a blur of anger, desperation, loneliness, and sadness. Since his father's death, nothing seemed real. People were kind and caring toward Billy, but it all seemed like a play. They were playing their parts, doing what they had been rehearsing, speaking their lines flawlessly, but eventually his father's house was an empty shell of walls and casserole dishes. The play was over and everyone went home. Billy had been left alone on the stage with nowhere to go. "Erased, huh?" Billy said out loud, mostly to himself. He liked the sound of this. The pain and guilt from a life of stupid mistakes, the sting of words spoken to him by his father, the emptiness and loneliness he constantly felt would all vanish away. The calming of his anxieties and fears finally seemed like a reality. In his darkest moments, he dreamt of what it might be like to feel nothing, what it might feel like to know nothing. His hopes were quickly destroyed as his intellect kicked back in. None of this was making any sense. What would make someone disappear? Why was he even starting to believe this guy? People can't just disappear, but no, he didn't say disappear, did he? He said he would be erased. What was the significance of that? More and more thoughts continued battling inside his head, fighting for Billy's belief. "Billy," Matthew interrupted his thoughts. Billy looked up. "I know what you're thinking. I know you see this as an escape from a life you hate. You look in the mirror and despise the person you see, and you feel like erasure is a good thing for you, that it will somehow bring you peace. Look at me. This will not be an escape to paradise. If you stay here, the pain will be more than you experience now." Billy looked up into Matthew's eyes, and for the first time, maybe in his life, believed he was looking at someone really trying to reach out to him. He didn't know Matthew at all, had never met him before, but for some reason, he really felt like Matthew cared about him, and it made him uncomfortable. "You are special, Billy," Matthew said, placing a hand on Billy's shoulder. "I know you don't believe it, but you are. And if you come with me, you will be able to see just how special and needed you are. If you don't, if you choose to stay here, fine, it's your decision. I'll leave you alone and never bother you again. But I promise you, it will be a decision you will regret. Your life will become a wasteland of pain and loss." "What's the difference?" Billy screamed out. He was surprised by his own reaction. The words came out as rage. "This world you describe, a place of pain and loss, this is a world I live in right now. I live in it every day." He was almost crying now, but he refused to let the tears fall. "I do look in the mirror and hate the person I see. You're right about that. I want to smash my fists into the mirror and feel the glass ripping my skin to shreds. I can't shake the feelings of shame and worthlessness and loneliness because my own brain keeps reminding me this is the person I am." The anger and disgust was reaching a boiling point inside him. He had been learning over the past several months techniques to control and harness his anger, but right now he couldn't. He didn't want to. Billy wanted to feel the fury slowly wrapping itself around him. He wanted to allow the hatred to take its full course. "You describe hell, my friend," Billy nearly screamed, his whole body shaking, sweat beginning to stream in little rivers down his forehead. "My life is a living hell." "Billy, listen to me." Matthew grabbed Billy by the shoulder, bringing him back to reality. "If you stay here, if you don't come with me, hell wins." 6 months later, Billy looked intensely into the deep, dark forest. He saw the small, run-down building just ahead of him. The singular lighted windows seemed to be calling out his name, beckoning him, daring him to come. The anticipation continued building up inside while he looked at Matthew, nearly in disbelief. "What are we doing?" he thought. "Why are we still sitting here?" He didn't dare say these words out loud. This whole time, Matthew appeared to know what he was doing, and Billy was starting to understand the consequences of what they were doing. It was waiting for the inevitable that was killing him. "Matthew, you ready?" Billy whispered impatiently. Matthew crouched silently in the darkness, staring at the building in the woods. "Let's go!" Billy made his move, rushing forward with all his strength, but Matthew grabbed his arm, pulling him back, causing Billy to stumble to the ground. "You don't have to do this," Matthew said. "What?" Billy could not believe what he was hearing. "You were the one who told me I had to do this. Something about millions of people being erased from existence?" "Listen to me," Matthew pleaded. Billy could see the sweat dripping from Matthew's forehead. He was clearly afraid. "If we go in there, into that room, there's a really good chance neither one of us will make it out alive." Everything was happening in slow motion for Billy. He slowly brought himself to sit on the ground, looking long and hard at Matthew. He could not believe what he was seeing. Matthew was scared. Was Matthew beginning to second-guess this whole thing? Was Billy a fool for believing him in the first place? "I have to do this," Billy said. Matthew looked hard at Billy, turned to a lighted window, back to Billy. "You sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure." "Okay then," Matthew said, slowly rising to his feet. "Let's do this." Monday, April 16th, 10:30 p.m. The phone rang out, nearly startling the young businessman staring out into the darkness from his high-rise office. He loved looking over the city at night. The largeness of the city, the darkness of the sky, and the vastness of space reminded him just how small he really was. It was awe-inspiring to him. On most nights, he would turn from the window and walk out of his office a refreshed man, but not now, not tonight. The darkness of the night was wrapping itself around his heart, trying to convince him to change his mind. "Stop it!" he screamed out at nothing. The phone rang again, and he turned to answer it. His mind was made up. His heart would not be moved. Tonight would be his last night alive. He answered the phone. "This is Matthew." Silence for a moment, as he listened to the voice on the other line. "Hey, sis, I understand. Please tell him I'll be there soon. Tell him to hang on as long as he can. Okay. I love you. Bye." He slowly put the phone in his pocket and turned to take one last look out of his window. The night seemed darker than normal, and the reflection of the man in the window looked more tired than he remembered. Finally, he turned away from the night, glanced around his office, looked at the few pictures resting on his desk, and headed toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the light switch. His mind had not yet been able to convince his heart, but he knew from experience it was not always wise to let the heart lead the mind. Shifting his gaze upwards, he looked past the ceiling toward the sky. At this moment, he knew all heaven was silent, watching, observing. He knew the angels were crowding around, breathless, anxious about what was about to happen. "Matthew," he whispered solemnly, "you know what you have to do. Just walk out the door and do it." He flicked the light switch down, closed the door, and left the building. Chapter 1 of saVed. Copyright 2015, all rights reserved.